Let's take a closer look at this. So the first quatrain here, the first four verses here, two households, both alike in dignity. When we say households here, what do we mean? Households, what's a household? It's another word for household. Anybody?
Is it like
Often when we use the word household, we're talking about the wealthy. But a family can be literally either the people who live in one house or a family in a more extensive. So two households, two families. Often the word house is used to refer to an extended family, particularly when we're dealing with people like nobility. So you talk about the, in the scriptures, this is used often, the house of David means the royal family of King David, house of David. And they're both alike in dignity. What do we mean here when we talk about dignity?
what?
Wealth. What else do we mean with dignity besides just wealth? The respect that people have for you, influence, nobility. These are dignified families, and they're alike in dignity. They're equally dignified, equally wealthy, powerful, influential, respected. In fair Verona, where we lay our scene, what does it mean to lay your scene? Right, where it's located. The scene, literally, it's a play. The scene is located in Verona, fair Verona, beautiful Verona. Where is Verona? In Italy. A lot of Shakespeare's plays are set in Italy. That was sort of the fashionable place in Shakespeare's time. England, okay, not very fashionable then. I guess it's not super fashionable now. But Italy, yes, that's romantic. They've got great art there, great literature, great food. The weather's nice and warm. It doesn't rain all the time like in England. So a lot of Shakespeare's plays are set in various places in Italy. Here, this one's set in Verona, fair Verona, where we lay our scene. Notice, remember when we talked about Homer, how one of the characteristics of epic poetry is you don't just name something. You don't just say Achilles. You say swift Achilles or godlike Achilles. Poetry in general is more likely to do that than our normal speech. You might just say Verona, but here it's poetry. We want to raise things up another level, so we say fair Verona. All right, so what about these two households in fair Verona? From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny. What is a grudge? Let's just get some of these words up here. Remember, when you're learning these poems, make sure you know the words, the definitions, how to pronounce them, so you understand the poems. Dignity, we said, wealth, influence, respect. What do we mean when we talk about a grudge? It's a grudge. Yeah, it's when just any time that I'm angry against somebody is a grudge.
When you keep it for a period of time.
Right, it's kept over a long time. Right, so this is anger over a long time. Usually it's a personal thing, a grudge. You personally have a grudge against someone else personally. And so these two households, they have an ancient grudge. So what does that mean that it's ancient?
It's over a long time.
Yeah, it's from a long time ago. It's been going on a long time. From ancient grudge, they break to new mutiny. What is mutiny?
Mutiny, like when if you had to kill the captain.
Yes, the literal definition of a mutiny is when the crew of a ship overthrows the captain of the ship and takes over the ship. So what does it mean that from this ancient grudge they break out into new mutiny? What is this mutiny here? They're not on a boat. What does Shakespeare mean when he says mutiny here?
Just killing their leader?
Not necessarily. So these are two dignified, respectable families. But they aren't the ones who are the top dogs in Verona. There is a prince in charge of the city. The mutiny here is that the fighting that they're going to break out into from this ancient grudge is a form of rebellion. It's against the laws there, and they're causing trouble with the general political stability of the city there. These are two very influential families, and now they're fighting each other in the streets, we'll see. And that's a form of rebellion against the leader here. So, and it's new mutiny from an ancient grudge. Notice the contrast there in that line. Ancient grudge, new mutiny. It existed a long time, and here it's going to flare up again. Where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. We're talking about civil. Let me say something civil. There's a few different meanings to this word, and that's what Shakespeare's playing on in this line, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean.
Of the people.
Okay, so the most basic meaning is belonging to a citizen. The Latin word civis means a citizen. So, of course, their hands are civil because they're citizens of Verona, so it makes them civil hands. What else can civil mean? I advise you to keep a civil tongue in your head. What does civil mean in that context? Well-behaved, respectable, polite. The other thing that we talk about, civil, something can be civil as opposed to being in the legal system. There are two different types of cases you can have. You can have a civil case, or you can have a criminal case. A civil case is like a lawsuit, where you think that somebody did something wrong, not necessarily illegal, but something where they did something wrong, like they violated a contract and you deserve some damages, as opposed to a criminal. So civil as opposed to criminal, or civil as opposed to military, like civilians are people not in the military, or civil as opposed to ecclesiastical, having to do with the ecclesiastical having to do with the church, and civil not members of the clergy. So it can be belong to a citizen, but also polite, also not military. And so here, when Shakespeare writes this line, he says that here in fair Verona, Verona is a place where civil blood, the blood of citizens, or maybe the blood of respectable people, of wealthy, respectable people, makes civil hands, hands that are supposed to be dignified, hands that are supposed to be polite, hands that are not part of the military. It makes them unclean. These people, their civil hands have civil blood on them. They have blood on their hands, literally or figuratively. You know that expression, to have blood on your hands? It means to be responsible for someone else's death. Obviously, referring to literally, if you kill somebody, you're very likely to get blood. Their blood on your hands, but also we say figuratively, having blood on your hands, being guilty of somebody's death. We're responsible for it. All right. That's the first quatrain, just the first 4 lines. I want to go through the next quatrain, and that'll be it for today. We'll go through the rest of it tomorrow. And here, listen to this line. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. What do you hear a lot of? Just when you listen to that line. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. The F sound a lot. From, forth, fatal, foes. What do we call that? Do you know this? Remember what this is called? When you repeat the same sound at the beginning of the word. sort of like rhyme. The rhyme is sounds at the end. Here, the sound at the beginning, when we repeat that, do you know what that's called? It's called alliteration. Let's see if I can fit it in here. Alliteration. Repeating the same sound at the beginning of words. So, from forth the fatal loins of these two foes. Remember, with poetry, the sound is important also. When the author, when the poet does something like this, it draws our attention. We hear that, and that sound makes us interested in it. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. He's drawing our attention here. He's got a new idea started. So first he's setting things up in Verona. Yes, it's a fair place, but also it's a place where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Now here's a new idea, and I'm going to draw your attention to it with this alliteration. 4 words in one line starting with the same sound, that's a lot of alliteration. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. And notice the first and the last word have that sound. From, foes. Now what are we talking about here? From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. What are foes? What's a foe? What's a foe? An enemy. So what are these two foes? The two families, right. These two foes, these two enemies, these two enemy families. And what are their loins, the fatal loins of these two foes? What are loins? Loins. This word comes up in Scripture a lot. It says, gird your loins. Loins are the genitalia. You know what that word means?
Yeah.
Yes? The private parts? Okay. All right. That's what loins are. And their loins are fatal. What does it mean when something's fatal?
Deadly.
Yeah, deadly. Or the other meaning that could have is related to fate. Doomed. Doomed. It's from the same root as fate. Fate and fatal. Something that's fatal literally means it's related to your fate. Often meaning death. But here, either deadly or doomed. Now, why are their loins, why are the loins of these foes fatal? Both of these senses, actually. Well, the first sense is easy to see. Why are they fatal? Why do we say their loins are fatal? Why does he say their loins are fatal? The fatal loins of these two foes. Why does he say that they're deadly? What's going on with these two families? They're fighting and killing each other. And so their loins, which normally would be producing new life, instead are leading to death and destruction. But also, Shakespeare chooses fatal here. It's a very apt word because it's also doomed. You guys probably know enough of the story of Romeo and Juliet to know that these people are doomed. It's their fate. They can't escape it, that these bad things are going to happen to them. That's another common aspect of tragedy, is this one of fate and not being able to escape fate. It's just the way the things have to be. Fate. Okay. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. So something's going to come from their loins. Coming forth from your loins is a way of saying, like giving birth to. What do their fatal loins give birth to? A pair of star-crossed lovers. What does it mean to be star-crossed? It's related to this idea of fate. You guys know what astrology is? Like your horoscope? You know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, so astrology is this idea that the stars and the planets and their position in the sky controls people's lives on Earth, particularly what they're like when you're born. That your fate is controlled by the stars. And so he says that these lovers are star-crossed. The stars are against them. Fate is against them. Here the stars referring to the fate. The universe is against them, you would say. They're star-crossed. And these star-crossed lovers take their life from these fatal lines. And again, we have another phrase here that can have two meanings. What can it mean to take your life from something? What does it mean to take your life?
Okay.
More specifically, we say Romeo takes his life.
Oh, kills some.
Kills himself, right. So there's one meaning, to kill yourself, to take your life. The other one would be literally getting your life from. So these two lovers, Romeo and Juliet, they get their life from these fatal lines, from these doomed families. But also, by knowing what's going to happen, they take their life in that other sense. They take their own lives. Okay. Universe against you, you can say for this. Okay. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows. This is Shakespeare showing off in this line. How many long, unusual words can I get in one line? Okay, these lovers, they have overthrows, are bad things that happen to them. They're piteous. What does it mean for them to be piteous, these overthrows?
Like, feels that one.
Right, we feel bad for them. What is this? We've been talking about this. Overthrows, misfortune. Remember, this is a tragedy. What are the two emotions we're supposed to feel for tragedy?
Pity and anger.
And fear. But pity, these overthrows, these misfortunes, these bad things that happen to them are piteous. They make us feel bad for them. And they're misadventured. They're unfortunate. Misadventured overthrows. It's a bit redundant. It's a bit repetitive. But there you go. Shakespeare just showing off a bit his vocabulary. And what happens with these overthrows, with this misfortune? They do, with their death, bury their parents' strife. What is strife? Conflict. Strife is conflict. So they bury their parents' conflict with their death. What does it mean to bury their parents' conflict? To end it, right? Like burying the hatchet. You know that expression? You bury the hatchet. That means you stop fighting with each other. We're going to bury the hatchet. And here, the unfortunate things that happen to Romeo and Juliet, these lovers, bury the conflict between their parents. They end it. But also notice the word that Shakespeare uses here to refer to ending it. What does he say? It does what to their parents' strife? It buries them. Burial being associated with what? We bury things that are dead. There's this connection here between the death and the ending of the conflict. And we'll read more about that in the next quatrain tomorrow. But that's enough here about the first two quatrains, the first two sets of 4 lines. A lot of things going on here. This is really packed here. The vocabulary, make sure you know the vocabulary so that you understand what's being said here, so that you can, when you recite it, you can recite it in such a way that it makes it easier for the audience to understand. One of the things that's really impressive, if you go and see a Shakespeare play or watch a really good filmed version of one, the one that we're going to watch it's all right in this respect. But if you watch really good actors who are experienced in doing Shakespeare plays, is that they do a very good job of making it possible for the audience to understand what they're saying. Even though nowadays very educated people don't speak anything like this. And there are a lot of words in every single Shakespeare play that are just really weird. That there are some words that Shakespeare is the first person to use them that we know of in the English language. And sometimes those words became normal, like eyeball. And sometimes those words just never appear again. They just didn't catch on. But a really good Shakespearean actor makes a big difference in the audience's ability to understand. Now, of course, you also get the You get the context information from the sets and the costumes and the lighting and all of that. But a really good actor makes a huge difference. Yes, Shakespeare's language is difficult, but if you can present it to someone in a way that conveys that meaning because you understand it well, that's going to make a huge difference. And it's really impressive when somebody's able to do that. So make sure you know the words, how to pronounce them. I don't think there's anything in this one in particular that's really difficult to pronounce, at least not here. But there are some weird pronunciation things in some of the other ones here. All right, any questions about just the first two quatrains there? All right. Okay, so I've given a bit of background information about Shakespeare, about tragedy. Before we actually start reading the play, I want to read through this adapted version from the what's called Tales from Shakespeare. This husband and wife, Charles and Mary Lamb, who went through most of the plays of Shakespeare, at least all the well-known ones. These ones just leave here, don't take these home. And they adapted the plays for students. So then you could read these, and it tells the story of the play in a shorter version. We want to make sure we understand the plot, because when we're reading the play itself, we want to be trying to focus on Shakespeare's language, focus on the poetry there, understanding things the way that he expressed them. Okay, so in here, if you turn to page 244, you'll get Romeo and Juliet. And we'll start reading through there. This is about, what, 10 pages or so? 15? About 15 pages. And so 244. So we'll read through this over the next couple of days to get us ready for Romeo and Juliet. So Romeo and Juliet here, page 244. The two chief families in Verona were the rich Capulets and the Montagues. There had been an old quarrel between these families, which was grown to such a height, and so deadly was the enmity between them, enmity means being enemies, between them, that it extended to the remotest kindred, to the followers and retainers of both sides, insomuch that a servant of the house of Montague could not meet a servant of the house of Capulet, accidental meetings which disturbed the happy, quiet Verona's streets. Here, this is their version here of the very beginning and the first scene of the play. They can't even bump into each other on the street without some kind of fight starting. Old Lord Capulet made a great supper, to which many fair ladies and many noble guests were invited. All the admired beauties of Verona were present, and all comers were made welcome if they were not of the house of Montague. At this feast of Capulets, Rosaline, beloved of Romeo, son to the old Lord Montague, was present. And though it was dangerous for a Montague to be seen in this assembly, yet Benvolio, a friend of Romeo, persuaded the young lord to go to this assembly in the disguise of a mask. Hello, Mr. McPherson. I borrowed a few of these from your room.
Okay.
I only need them for a couple days, and then you can use them.
So.
Okay. Yet Benvolio, a friend of Romeo, persuaded the young lord to go to this assembly in the disguise of a mask, that he might see his Rosaline, and seeing her, compare her with some choice beauties of Verona, who, he said, would make him think his swan a crow. Romeo thinks that Rosaline is a swan. She's this graceful, beautiful bird. But Benvolio says, you go to this party, you'll see the other young ladies of Verona, you'll think she's a crow by comparison. Romeo had small faith in Benvolio's words. Nevertheless, for the love of Rosaline, he was persuaded to go. Top of 245. For Romeo was a sincere and passionate lover, and one that lost his sleep for love, and fled society to be alone, thinking on Rosaline, who disdained him, and never requited his love with the least show of courtesy or affection. And Benvolio wished to cure his friend of this love by showing him diversity of ladies and company. To this feast of Capulets, then, young Romeo with Benvolio and their friend Mercutio went masked. Old Capulet bid them welcome, and told them that ladies who had their toes unplagued with corns would dance with them. And the old man was light-hearted and merry, and said that he had worn a mask when he was young, and could have told a whispering tale in a fair lady's ear. And they fell to dancing, and Romeo was suddenly struck with the exceeding beauty of a lady who danced there, who seemed to him to teach the torches to burn bright. and her beauty to show by night like a rich jewel worn by a blackamoor. Beauty too rich for use, too dear for earth. Like a snowy dove trooping with crows, he said. So richly did her beauty and perfections shine above the ladies her companions. He sees this young woman. He says, her beauty is too rich for use, like a gem that's too beautiful to wear, like a dove among crows, similar to what his friend had said before about how he thought that Rosalind was a swan, but she seemed like a crow. While he uttered these praises, he was overheard by Tybalt, a nephew of Lord Capulet, who knew him by his voice to be Romeo. And this Tybalt, being of a fiery and passionate temper, could not endure that a Montague should come under cover of a mask to fleer and scorn, as he said, at their solemnities. And he stormed and raged exceedingly and would have struck young Romeo dead. But his uncle, the old Lord Capulet, would not suffer him to do any injury at that time, both out of respect to his guests, and because Romeo had borne himself like a gentleman, and all tongues in Verona bragged of him to be a virtuous and well-governed youth. Tybalt, forced to be patient against his will, restrained himself, but swore that this vile Montague should at another time dearly pay for his intrusion. Romeo comes to this party in disguise, and Tybalt, the nephew of Lord Capulet, recognizes him by his voice and wants to kill him. But his uncle, who's holding the party, says, no, not now. Not at my nice party. But Tybalt is not going to let this slide. Bottom of 245. The dancing being done, Romeo watched the place where the lady stood, and under favor of his masking habit, which might seem to excuse in part the liberty, he presumed in the gentlest manner to take her by the hand, calling it a shrine, which if he profaned by touching it, he was a blushing pilgrim, and would kiss it for atonement. Good pilgrim, answered the lady, your devotion shows by far too mannerly and too courtly. Saints of hands, which pilgrims may touch, but kiss not. Have not saints lips, and pilgrims too? Said Romeo. Aye, said the lady, lips which they must use in prayer. Oh, then, my dear saint, said Romeo, hear my prayer and grant it, lest I despair. In such like allusions and loving conceits they were engaged, when the lady was called away to her mother. And Romeo, inquiring who her mother was, discovered that the lady whose peerless beauty he was so much struck with was young Juliet, daughter and heir to the Lord Capulet, the great enemy of the Montagues, and that he had unknowingly engaged his heart to his foe. This troubled him, but it could not dissuade him from loving. As little rest had Juliet when she found that the gentleman that she had been talking with was Romeo and a Montague, for she had been suddenly smit with the same hasty and inconsiderate passion for Romeo, which he had conceived for her. And a prodigious birth of love it seemed to her that she must love her enemy, and that her affections should settle there, where family considerations should induce her chiefly to hate. Okay, this bit here about the pilgrim and the shrine, that's one of the other selections here, which we'll talk a bit in detail when we get to that one. But here at this party, Romeo and Juliet, they meet, they speak with each other, they fall for each other, and then discover that, in fact, they're supposed to be mortal enemies. Towards the bottom of 246. It being midnight, Romeo with his companions departed, but they soon missed him, for unable to stay away from the house where he had left his heart, he leaped the wall of an orchard which was at the back of Juliet's house. Here he had not been long, ruminating on his new love, when Juliet appeared above at a window, through which her exceeding beauty seemed to break like the light of the sun in the east. And the moon, which shone in the orchard with a faint light, appeared to Romeo as if sick and pale with grief at the superior luster of this new sun. She's like a sun outshining the moon here at night. And she, leaning her cheek upon her hand, he passionately wished himself a glove upon that hand, he might touch her cheek. She, all this while thinking herself alone, fetched a deep sigh and exclaimed, "Ah me!" Romeo, enraptured to hear her speak, and said softly and unheard by her, "Oh, speak again, bright angel, for such you appear, being over my head, like a winged messenger from heaven whom mortals fall back to gaze upon." She, unconscious of being overheard and full of the new passion which that night's adventure had given birth to, called upon her lover by name, whom she supposed absent. "O Romeo, Romeo," said she, "wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father, and refuse thy name for my sake. Or if thou wilt not, be but my sworn love, and I no longer will be a Capulet." Romeo, having this encouragement, would fain have spoken. He would have liked to have spoken. But he was desirous of hearing more. And the lady continued her passionate discourse with herself, as she thought, still chiding Romeo for being Romeo and a Montague, and wishing him some other name, or that he would put away that hated name, and for that name which was no part of himself, he should take all herself. At this loving word, Romeo could no longer refrain, but taking up the dialogue as if her words had been addressed to him personally, and not merely in fancy, he bade her call him Love, or by whatever other name she pleased, for he was no longer Romeo if that name was displeasing to her. Juliet, alarmed to hear a man's voice in the garden, did not at first know who it was, that by favor of the night and darkness had thus stumbled upon the discovery of her secret. But when he spoke again, though her ears had not yet drunk 100 words of the tongue's uttering, yet so nice is a lover's hearing, that she immediately knew him to be young Romeo. And she expostulated with him on the danger to which he had exposed himself by climbing the orchard walls. For if any of her kinsmen should find him there, it would be death to him, being a Montague. This famous scene in Juliet's backyard, where she comes out on her balcony, and Romeo's hiding there in the bushes, and she doesn't realize that he's there when she's speaking about how much she wishes he was there. "Alack," said Romeo, "there is more peril in your eye than in 20 of their swords. Do you but look kind upon me, lady, and I am proof against their enmity. Better my life should be ended by their hate, than that hated life should be prolonged to live without your love." "How came you into this place," said Juliet, "and by whose direction?" "Love directed me," answered Romeo. "I am no pilot, yet wert thou as far apart from me as that vast shore which is washed with the farthest sea, I should venture for such merchandise." A crimson blush came over Juliet's face, yet unseen by Romeo by reason of the night, when she reflected upon the discovery which she had made, yet not meaning to make it, of her love to Romeo. She would fain have recalled her words, but that was impossible. Fain would she have stood upon form and have kept her lover at a distance, as the custom of discreet ladies is, to frown and be perverse, and give their suitors harsh denials at first, to stand off and affect a coyness of indifference, where they most love, that their lovers may not think them too lightly or too easily won. For the difficulty of attainment increases the value of the object. But there was no room, in her case, for denials, or puttings off, or any of the customary arts of delay and protracted courtship. Romeo had heard from her own tongue, when she did not dream that he was near her, a confession of her love. So with an honest frankness, which the novelty of her situation excused, she confirmed the truth of what he had before heard, and addressing him by the name of fair Montague, love can sweeten a sour name, she begged him not to impute her easy yielding to levity or an unworthy mind, but that he must lay the fault of it, if it were a fault, upon the accident of the night which had so strangely discovered her thoughts. And she added that though her behavior to him might not be sufficiently prudent, measured by the custom of her sex, yet that she would prove more true than many whose prudence was dissembling, and their modesty artificial cunning. So in this famous balcony scene, notice how here already things sort of start to go wrong for Romeo and Juliet. Yes, they meet by chance at this party, and they fall for each other quite by surprise. And then Romeo, in a moment of enthusiasm, sneaks into Juliet's garden that night, and she happens to come out and happens to say aloud, thinking no one is there, how much she has fallen for him. And so this whole complicated courtship that otherwise would have happened with Romeo pursuing her and her pretending to not be interested and turning him down and making sure that he really was interested in pursuing her and all of that, which normally would have preceded this, is cut short. And the two of them, Juliet by accident and Romeo intentionally, after hearing Juliet, have revealed to the other one how they feel. And so the whole course that this relationship might have taken is suddenly accelerated. Instead of this meeting and this mutual interest and then it growing over time as it's pursued, instead, within just a couple of hours, things escalate very quickly. All right, we'll pause there. Please put these on the shelf. Nothing due tomorrow, but test on Thursday. Thank you very much.